Look, all right. No one knows anything, so we can all just go home and stop debating. It's over. I can finally just shut down this channel and stop making videos. So one of the main issues that I see pop up in debates around different forms of theism and atheism is the question of knowledge, specifically referencing this as an absolute certainty, and how one can hold to a position without knowing one way or another whether or not they're right. And this extends beyond this particular subject into several other realms. There's all kinds of different standards that people use for understanding whether or not one holds knowledge. Some people appeal to science, some to their sacred texts or just articles, others to their experience or perspective, some to reason and rationality. Most people have combinations of these in their life. They'll see an experiment and trust the experiment. They'll read a source and trust the source. Or they'll have a set of experiences and trust those experiences. And there's good reasons for doing any of these things. And, there's also bad reasons for doing these things. And something can be false despite good reasons, or true despite bad reasons. Perhaps the experiment was done dishonestly. Perhaps the source being read is biased, poorly researched, or even malicious. And perhaps the experience is an incomplete perspective, or even a mistaken understanding entirely. These are all challenges that are put before us before we take a position on something. Maybe it's on something casual, or maybe it's something that's deeply personal. But I'd advise anyone that's interested in spirituality to get into epistemology, advocating for spirituality or against it. It's a fascinating subject. And getting into it revealed to me that popular standards, like verificationism's focus on empiricism as the determiner of truth, are incomplete ways of looking at epistemology, because they inherently dismiss much of what we engage with as humans. And yet, it's an often repeated position that if something is not empirically verified, it's not acceptable to believe, when in reality, empiricism increases likelihood, but it's not required for a rational belief, nor is something that's true necessarily empirically verifiable. This can be a paradigm-shifting realization for anyone who holds a standard of knowledge along the lines of scientific standards. Something can be verified and still be false, as we've seen a number of times throughout our history, and even a brief history of scientific study. This means that we can empirically know something to be true that's still false. New evidence will be revealed, and it changes what we thought we knew, even though we came to the former conclusion through empirical verification. And still further, there's many observations that we hold dear that scientific examination just doesn't apply, as they're impossible to verify, yet can still be studied. This would include things like logical analysis, aesthetic rules, personal judgments, and moral examinations. The laws of logic on which science is based cannot be verified by science without question begging. This is part of the reason why science, like theology, is a subset of philosophy, because we check both of them with philosophical values like logic. Sometimes science can be helpful in discussing these things, but not conclusively, especially physical sciences. Sometimes social sciences can be helpful in these questions, but often these sciences are dismissed by people that hold a stronger favor towards physical sciences, to the extent of even applying it outside of its realm. Evidence that should be acceptable in historical or sociological conversation is often readily dismissed by hard verificationists, despite their justified relevancy. And I see this fairly regularly in conversations about history, where the Bible is a valid source for discussion, or conversations about gender, when valid sociological studies are dismissed out of hand. Now, it's often because people don't know any better, but that doesn't change the frustration. An important caveat, however, is that this should not be used as some opportunity to leap upon bad science or conspiratorial thinking. Just because the epistemic challenges that I mentioned earlier exist does not mean that therefore pseudoscience is acceptable. It's not. And in fact, it's simply worse because it's even less supported. One of my major issues with some popular movements within spiritualism or some more eclectic forms of paganism is fluffy bunny approaches to belief. This is the approach of promoting pseudoscience or revisionist history. Not only is this approach harmful for those being sucked into it, but it's harmful to the overall credibility of pagans as we get associated with that crap. But I'll be getting more into that in the future. That being said, I've had a few conversations with polytheists discussing spirituality and its odd relationship with epistemology. Often there's been this point where they believe in the gods, but they don't know that they exist, and that they find this bothersome, and they don't want to get, the fluffy bunny label or even provide excuses or opportunities to them by accident. I went through a similar experience. I felt that there was a need to be right in these conversations with a confidence and certainty. There's a sense in Christianity that there needs to be a dogmatic certainty, and this pops up in many of the monotheistic religions and their spin-offs. In speaking with Mr. Atheist, he's recounted a number of times that the Mormon Church demands a public statement of faith, that one knows one of several elements of the Mormon faith. An example might be that they know that Jesus Christ redeemed mankind, or that Joseph Smith restored God's church, which is a massive overstatement of knowledge, and it puts the person in a position of having made this proclamation in front of their peers, and the social pressure ensues that they must live up to it. This shows how knowledge can be a bit of a weasel word, something that can shift in meaning through a conversation, and I don't think that a reasonable usage of the word knowledge references absolute certainty, but too often that's how it's used in colloquial language. So that, when someone says, I know this to be the case, they mean with absolute certainty. And even in the context of this conversation, some Christians are the biggest perpetrators of this, saying that they don't just believe in their God, they know, reinforcing that dogmatic certainty. And I think that this results in a reaction, that uncertainty must be dogmatic as well, that if you don't know, or I think more accurately, can't know in this sense, that then you must therefore not hold the position or even believe the position, such that many atheists will often step back from even saying that they believe that the gods do not exist, because they can't know either way. So they withhold belief because they lack knowledge, which is, it's cart before the horse. Both of these attitudes seem to affect new polytheists almost equally, as if we're caught in between these two dogmas, disagreeing with both of them, and also stuck in this position of not really having a choice as to what we believe. So there's a present belief, but we're stuck as to how to label it, stricken with latent Christianity of not claiming a belief in the gods unless we know, but also with this narrative of that if we don't know, we must not believe, in spite of the fact that we do. I've learned that, there's a serious problem with both of these, and they're intertwined. To start, there's not really much of a way to really know very much in this unreasonable sense. We have our assertions rooted in our experiences, but we could be wrong. And that goes for our physical experiences of the world around us, or our spiritual experiences, or anything in between. The universe around us could be a mental projection. It could be purely physical. It could be something else entirely that we don't yet understand. And yet it's fine to believe any of these things, despite not having any degree of certainty around them beyond what we experience and how we interpret that experience. Now, there seems to be a collective understanding of similarity in experiences. We share them with one another and compare them. We find areas of agreement. Trees are green, concrete is rough to the touch. And this happens as well with religious experience, an experience with the gods. There's also differences. We might have differing political beliefs. We might see life completely differently depending on the perspective of what we assume is the same reality. And again, we see the same with religious experience and experience with the gods. And yet, in both cases, we might not know these things to be true with certainty, but we still believe them, and that's usually fine. Now, is someone right? Well, probably. There's a few billion humans, At least someone's got to be onto something. But or maybe we're all wrong. Who knows? But until we have some way of finding out, it's not necessarily the most important question. Have your experiences and perspectives led you to a belief in the gods? Then fine. Have they led you to disbelieve in them? Then fine. You should question yourself. You should find out why you hold these positions. But there's nothing irrational about a belief in the gods on its own. Nor is there anything irrational about a disbelief in them. Now, you can make it so by using an illogical argument or putting contradictory attributes onto the gods, but that's an entirely different conversation than belief on its own. But at the end of the day, it's okay not to know, at least not in a sense of absolute certainty, because nobody really does. You can say you know something is coherent, You can say you know it's consistent with your experience. And I can say, I know these things about the gods. And if you agree on those points, your belief is justified. Where you go from there is up to you. Do you respond to this belief? Do you do anything about it? There's plenty of information to find. But I would say not to concern yourself with whether or not you know. Uncertainty does not mean that something has to be dismissed. Otherwise, we would dismiss the universe around us. In fact, as someone who loves puzzles, especially impossible ones, the kind of uncertainty offered by this question is one that I think deserves honest exploration. Let me know your thoughts. This is one of the positions that I hold that probably confuses the most people. I think that dogmatic certainty is actually something that's fairly common, and people don't often realize that it's dogmatism that's set off on, locking off a discussion and exploration, even experimentation. I didn't start exploring polytheism until I realized that it was an option, and I didn't make that realization until I met a polytheist. And sometimes people leaving Christianity don't realize that belief is still on the table. It's just approached differently than the forced dogmatic certainty that they'd experienced in the past. But finally, with that, hail to my patrons for making this content possible. It's good to have people at your back. And thanks to everyone for watching, liking, and leaving a comment. And remember to find a way or make one.